Hi, I'm Jay Reed. I'm a practicing psychotherapist in San Francisco, California. And in today's video, I want to discuss the process of narcissistic blaming as it plays out in the family system at home. So I'd like to do a quick review on the narcissistic psychology that was covered in a prior video entitled The Psychology of Narcissistic Parents. But quickly, when you think of a narcissist, the first thing to assume is a deep felt sense of worthlessness, and an equally important need to combat that sense of worthlessness by coming up with sort of antidotal solutions that argue otherwise, that in fact argue the exact opposite, that they are not worthless but sort of full of worth, and consciously at least worth more than others. And that's what is called grandiosity, an artificially inflated sense of self-worth, where one's own needs, perspectives, opinions are more important or valuable than others. And the second sort of antidotal strategy to that sense of worthlessness is the expectation that others will comply with this grandiose sense of themselves. They will reflect that back to the narcissistic person. It can mean agreeing with them. It can mean showing immense gratitude in any act of, or minor act of kindness. Whatever it is, it reinforces what the narcissist needs to hear, which is that, in essence, in so many words, I am great. In fact, or perhaps even I am superior. And oftentimes that wouldn't be admitted, but that is the crux of what they need to hear in order to combat the flip side of that coin of that dreaded worthlessness. As discussed before too, both these strategies of grandiosity and entitlement are inherently requiring the person to focus upon themselves. And we would call that self-absorbed and perhaps even self-conceited due to the boosting of their sense of themselves. Both those things, self-absorption and self-conceit, are unattractive features, right, in our culture. So that needs to sort of be hidden. And the narcissist will often go to great lengths to see the sort of self-absorption and self-aggrandizement in other people rather than themselves. So if you think about this psychology and then kind of bring it into a family system or a family, and I'd like to address oftentimes how it will play out, the narcissist psychology, but also the roles that other people in the family will play. So this kind of takes from a lot of the addiction literature, which sort of is, in essence, a family that is based around hiding deep levels of shame in the family system. In addiction, it's the shame felt by the addicted person. But in this case, it's a bit of a tweak, but I think it very much applies to families with a narcissist who is in essence at the head of the household. I will say too that I'm going to go through roles that are played and kind of refer to a nuclear family, and that's sort of just for the sake of brevity and ease of communication here. And there's all kinds of configurations where this can play out and that families are structured, and of course all are equally viable, but I think there are certain complementary roles to the narcissist that need to be addressed, and my hope for today is that that'll become clear. So the narcissistic family system, at the head of it we would have, let's say, the narcissist, and that could be the mother or the father in this case, and the qualities of that person, as we've discussed, they possess the psychology of sort of needing very frequent reaffirmation of their elevated sense of themselves. So that leaves them to sort of feeling self-absorbed, believing that their needs are more important than others, having a very fragile sense of self-esteem because it hinges on these antidotal solutions that are sort of brittle in nature. They need to sort of assume a sense of superiority, often particularly towards the people in their family, where likely their spouse and children are sort of seen as subjects, frankly, rather than in the royal sense, like they are subject to the king or queen. They possess very little empathy, find it very hard to think about and care about the feelings of others, even their family members. They also are fairly unscrupulous in what they will do to ensure that their grandiose sense of themselves stays as intact or as uninterrupted as possible. So they're not a lot of times bound by conscience in this regard, and as a result, a lot of their tactics can be quite cruel to coerce others into kind of believing that they are as superior as they need to feel. The other partner in the family system, I like to refer to as the enabler parent, and this person very easily falls into the role that the narcissist entitlement requires. They are willing and again eager to reinforce the narcissistic parent's elevated view of themselves. Oftentimes they have very low self-esteem themselves and therefore don't see as big a conflict in sort of exalting the narcissist, because they may feel they do not really deserve much of that themselves. They will appear overtly very compliant, fearing or very much avoiding confrontation, particularly with the narcissistic parent. Oftentimes they will also be sort of secretive or even dissociative, where they may have other ventures in their life where they get to sort of feel more fully themselves. But those are often kept compartmentalized off from their participation in the family. They want to appear as sort of a facade of agreeableness and participation, but the stuff that really matters to them, they keep sort of locked in a safe. And that can really lead to the sense of really not knowing where they stand. This feeds the narcissistic parent's need to sort of assume authority in the household. They don't get much of a contest from the enabler parent. So when these two folks have children in whatever fashion, there's sort of typically three roles that they play. And this, could be through having three separate children, or sometimes it doesn't apply equally, obviously, for every family. A family could have one child and this stuff could still be happening. But I want to just kind of go through the roles, because they may, even if you've been an only child to a narcissistic parent, you may have cycled through these roles longitudinally. So the first role is the golden child. This child can do no wrong in the narcissistic parent's eyes. It's not the best thing in the world, because the way the narcissistic parent views that golden child is as an extension of their own grandiosity, the parent's grandiosity. So they sort of take credit for the golden child's pursuits and exploits. Kind of like the little bird that cleans the alligator's teeth. The alligator really likes that bird, and the bird gets to survive, but solely because it's performing a function for that alligator. Similarly with the golden child, you can think of sort of the athletic academic star who doesn't really have a sense that people in his or her family know who he or she is, because the person doing the knowing is someone who really has a hard time seeing other people as separate from themselves, the narcissist, and really caring about the other person's independent subjective life. Unfortunately, this golden child is often co-opted to collude with who becomes the object of the narcissistic parent's ire. And that is what we'll get to in just a second. In essence, they have to sort of pledge their allegiance to the narcissistic parent in order to stay in that golden child role, which they likely witness is preferable to some of the other roles. The other two roles, the first the first of the other two is the lost child. This child tends to just kind of be overlooked and becomes adept at sort of hiding themselves in the family because they likely learn there's really not a whole lot to benefit from making an impact or being heard in the family. It could either be really good in a sort of superficial, shallow way like the golden child, or it could be really bad with what I'm about to discuss now in the third role, and that is that of the scapegoated child. The scapegoated child is the least likely family member to collude with the narcissistic parent's sense of entitlement that others will reflect back how, in essence, great he or she is. This child is typically strong-willed, sees things in a sort of fairness first mindset. It really, really matters usually to scapegoated children that dealings happen in a fair manner. As a result, when they are subjected to the coercive and manipulative tactics that a narcissist will employ to make sure people reflect back to her how she demands to be seen, the scapegoated child will see that as sort of inherently unrealistic and requiring correction. Well, speaking up in that manner does him or her no favors in a family system like this. What it will do is heighten the narcissistic parent's intensity of their sort of coercive tactics against this scapegoated child. They see them as a threat to their own kind of inner cohesion, excuse me, fragile as it is. So a few things will happen here. As I mentioned earlier, the narcissist is employing the tactics of grandiosity and entitlement to keep their sense of worthlessness at bay. So what they will likely do is accuse the scapegoated child of being the entitled one, the one who thinks he or she is so great, the one who ignores the family because he or she wants to go off and do things that make her happy, him or her happy. In essence, all the things that the narcissist is implicitly doing to keep themselves sort of emotionally afloat, but that do require tons of self-absorption, she will accuse the scapegoated child of doing these things. Lastly, and almost and sort of most destructively, once that is sort of agreed with in the context of the family, the enabler parent will either refuse to protest or collude with the parent and point the finger at the scapegoated child also, or and the golden child will likely kind of look down his or her nose at the scapegoated child. The next tact is to kind of see if the narcissist can get the scapegoated child to think of themselves as being worthless so that the narcissistic parent can see the worthlessness in that child rather than themselves. A brutal psychological maneuver, but one that the narcissist psychology very much seeks, to have a different repository, another human repository, for their own sense of worthlessness so that they can hope to not have to feel it. And the ways they can do this is just by the constant sort of systematic targeting, derision, in essence belittling, deceitful behavior where the scapegoated child is made to sort of always guess where he or she stands in relation to the family members. And campaigns or smear campaigns are sort of constantly brought against the child. And if that's done early and often enough, the child will sort of in process grow to think of themselves in the way that the narcissistic parent in essence wants them to think about themselves, not how they actually are, which is the crux of what therapy does, is understanding how they were sort of conditioned to think about themselves and distinguishing that from how they actually are in the world, which tends to be quite remarkable as people. But it was that remarkability that directly threatened the narcissist and in large part made them a target. So I hope this has been informative in terms of how the different roles play out in a family headed by a narcissist. And I look forward to posting more videos on narcissistic abuse, narcissistic psychology and abuse, and then in addition, therapy, processes and tactics that are useful in recovering one's sense of one's own real self after having survived this type of ordeal. Thank you.